Imagine standing on the literal roof of the world. You are the highest human being on the planet.
Hmm.
The air is so thin, your brain is barely functioning, the wind is just trying to peel you off the ridge, and you have just done something that, for centuries, was considered l- physiologically impossible.
Something people thought your body just couldn't do.
Exactly. You look down at the clouds, you look at your partner,
Mm.
and you realize, in that freezing, oxygen-deprived moment, that your life has fundamentally split into two distinct epochs. Everything before this and everything that comes after.
It's the ultimate before and after scenario, isn't it? And for the vast majority of people, the story of Sir Edmund Hillary begins and ends right there at 29,028 feet on the summit of Mount Everest, May 29th, 1953.
Exactly. We all know the photo of the climber in the mask raising the ice axe, which, spoiler alert, isn't even him, but we will absolutely get to that.
Oh, we will.
We know the name from the history test. But here's the thing that really blew my mind when we started digging into this. This massive stack of biographies, expedition logs, and personal letters for this deep dive. The man behind that mask is so much more complex than just the guy who climbed the hill.
It really is a case where the icon, the statue in the park has completely overshadowed the human being. Because when you strip away the down suit and the oxygen tanks, you don't find some superhero born with ice in his veins. You find a painfully shy, kind of awkward beekeeper from rural New Zealand who failed his math exams, was too terrified to propose to his girlfriend, and spent a significant amount of his post-Everest life hunting for the Yeti.
We are absolutely going to get to the Yeti. That is a non-negotiable part of this conversation.
It has to be.
But you're right. The mission of this deep dive isn't just to retell the story of the climb, though we are going to get into the gritty details of, frozen boots and near-death moments. The mission is to unpack the life of Edmund Hillary as this towering figure of the 20th century. A man who stood at both poles and the highest point on Earth, but who considered building wooden schoolhouses in Nepal his greatest achievement.
And that trajectory from a bee-stung face in Auckland to a Knight of the Garter is what we need to trace. Because it raises a fascinating question for us, for the listener. What is the nature of resilience? Is it something you're born with, or is it something you build day by agonizing day, carrying heavy boxes and staring down your own insecurities?
So let's unpack this. Let's go back to the very beginning. Because if you met the young Ed Hillary, say at age 12, you probably wouldn't have bet money on him becoming a world-famous physical adventurer.
Probably not, no. He was born in Auckland, New Zealand in 1919. And to understand Ed, you really have to understand his father, Percy. Percy Hillary was a veteran of Gallipoli.
And for anyone who might not be deep into World War I history, Gallipoli was. It was a horror show.
An absolute meat grinder. Percy came back from that campaign medically unfit. He was physically broken, nerves shattered, and he eventually became a journalist and an apiarist, a beekeeper.
Okay.
But the trauma of the war made him a very strict, very, very disciplined father.
And this beekeeping background, it's not just a footnote, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's central to his physical development. But before the bees, there was the grind of school. And when I say grind, I mean it was a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it was intense. The family lived in Tuakau, which is, rural, south of Auckland. But his mother, Gertrude, had these high aspirations. She wanted him to go to a good school, so she enrolled him in Auckland Grammar. Now, that sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah, until you look at the map.
Exactly. The commute was just brutal.
How long are we talking here?
For 3.5 years, starting at age 13, he had to travel by train and cycle. He was leaving the house before 7 a.m. and not getting back until after 6:00 p.m. That is a 1 hour and 40-minute journey each way.
Each way. Think about that for a second. You're a teenager. You're spending nearly 4 hours a day just getting to and from school.
Right.
That doesn't leave much time for hanging out with friends, playing rugby, or just being a kid.
And it had a profound effect on his personality. It effectively barred him from any after-school activities. He was socially isolated. He was initially smaller than his peers, very shy. And he didn't enjoy school at all. He described himself as having average marks.
So he wasn't the star pupil.
Not at all. He was the kid reading books on the train because he had no one to talk to. It really fostered this kind of internal life.
But physically, something was happening. He eventually shot up to 6'2", and he started boxing. And that's where the confidence started to trickle in, right?
A little bit, yeah. But the real spark, a moment the pilot light really went on, happened when he was 16.
The school trip to Mount Ruapehu.
That's the one. He sees snow for the very first time. He does a bit of climbing. And suddenly, the textbooks, the long commute, None of it matters anymore. He realized, in his own words, I want to see the world.
And it just shifted his focus entirely. From studying to tramping, which is what New Zealanders call hiking.
But there's another layer to his mental development that I find absolutely fascinating, and it's something often left out of the popular narrative.
Right.
It's the influence of a philosophy called radiant living.
Okay, yes. This stood out to me in the notes. To a modern ear, this sounds a bit, well, is it a cult? Or just a very intense self-help group?
It was a movement led by a man named Herbert Sutcliffe in the 1930s. The Hillary family were foundation members, and it preached physical health, Christian pacifism, and a specific kind of psychological self-improvement.
And Hillary didn't just attend casually?
No, he went all in. He actually trained to be a teacher of this philosophy.
And get this.
Yeah.
He scored 100% on his exam to become a teacher. And the topic of his test lecture: inferiority, cause, and cure.
Which is incredibly revealing, isn't it? Here's this young man battling deep shyness and feelings of inadequacy, literally lecturing a room full of people on how to cure inferiority.
He was teaching what he needed to learn.
Exactly. He later credited this period with teaching him how to speak confidently and think freely. It was the mental training ground that prepared him for the international stage. He was, in a way, hacking his own psychology.
So you've got the mental training with radiant living, and then you have the physical training with the bees. Because beekeeping sounds pastoral and gentle, but commercial beekeeping is basically weightlifting in a hazmat suit.
It was grueling work. He joined his brother Rex and his father in the business. They were handling 1,600 hives.
1,600.
And during the honey flow, they were lifting thousands of 90-pound boxes of honeycomb and getting stung. The source mentions he was getting stung anywhere from 12 to 100 times a day.
100 stings a day. I would quit after one. I would be done.
It builds a certain tolerance to discomfort, doesn't it? If you can handle 100 bee stings and keep working, a blizzard maybe seems a bit more manageable.
That's a good point.
But strategically, it was the perfect job for a climber. Beekeeping is intense summer work. But in the winter, the bees hibernate, which meant Hillary was physically fit from lifting boxes all summer, and then he had the entire winter free to climb.
It's the perfect alpinist lifestyle. So he's climbing, he's working the hives, but then history intervenes. World War II breaks out.
And this is where his radiant living background, specifically that pacifist element, caused some real internal conflict for him.
Right.
He initially applied to join the Royal New Zealand Air Force, but then withdrew his application because of his religious conscience. He didn't want to kill anyone.
But as the war went on and the threat of Japan and the Pacific grew, he couldn't just sit on the sidelines.
Right. In 1943, with conscription arriving, he joined the Air Force as a navigator on Catalina flying boats. He served in Fiji and the Solomon Islands. These were big, lumbering aircraft doing reconnaissance.
And he faced a major setback there. Not in combat, but in an accident.
The boat accident. Yes, he was in a motorboat that caught fire and he was badly burnt. He had to swim to shore with severe burns. It was a long, painful recovery.
Which again just speaks to that resilience we were talking about. He recovers, he comes home, and now the climbing resume starts to build and build seriously. He climbs Mount Olivier, his first major peak. He climbs a Rocky Mount Cook. And then he gets the call for the big leagues.
The 1951 reconnaissance expedition to Everest, this was led by the legendary Eric Shipton. Now, Shipton had a very high opinion of New Zealand climbers. He called them rough diamonds.
He liked that they could fix a stove as well as they could climb a rock face.
Exactly. He liked their toughness, their practicality. He saw something in Hillary. And Hillary proved him right. In 1952, they tried to climb Cho'uyu, another massive 8,000-meter peak.
And they failed, right?
They failed to find a route to the summit, but this is where we see that rebellious streak in Hillary again. He and his friend George Lowe just decided, hey, let's cross the Nupal Pass into Tibet.
Which was basically an international incident waiting to happen.
Incredibly risky. Tibet was Chinese-controlled and technically closed to foreigners, but they just wanted to see the north side of Everest, so they sneaked across the border, effectively invading China for an afternoon.
Just for a look.
Just for a look. But it showed Shipton and the British climbing establishment that Hillary had this drive to push boundaries, to go where he wasn't supposed to go.
And that drive is exactly what they needed for 1953. Because 1953 wasn't just another climbing trip, it was the main event.
The 1953 British Mount Everest expedition. And we have to set the stage here. This was not just a climbing trip, it was a siege. It was seen as the last great prize for the British Empire, which was slowly fading.
The scale is just bonkers. We're talking about over 400 people.
362 porters. 20 Sherpa guides, 10,000 pounds of baggage. It's basically a small army moving up the Khumbu Valley.
And the pressure was immense.
Oh, unbelievable. You have to remember, Tibet was closed, so the only way up Everest was from Nepal. And Nepal only allowed one, maybe two expeditions a year. The Swiss had tried in 1952, the year before, and Tenzing Norgay was with them.
And they got so close.
They made it to within 800 feet of the top before turning back.
800 feet. That is just heartbreakingly close.
It is. So the British knew, if we don't do it this year, the French are booked for next year, and the Swiss are booked for the year after that. It was now or never for the British Empire to conquer the third pole.
And there was a bit of drama at the top, too, wasn't there? A leadership shakeup. Eric Shipton, the guy who discovered Hillary, was replaced as leader by John Hunt.
Hillary was furious about that. He actually considered pulling out of the expedition. He felt a deep loyalty to Shipton. But John Hunt was a military man. Super organized, incredible energy. He eventually won Hillary over.
And Hunt made a crucial decision. He created two summit teams.
This is the part of the story that always gets me. Hillary and Tenzing weren't the only ones with a shot. In fact, they were kind of the backup plan initially. Well, sort of. Hunt planned a 1-2 punch. The first team, the beta team, if you will, was Tom Bourdillon and Charles Evans, and they went first. On May 26th, they launched their assault.
Imagine sitting in a tent at high camp, watching your friends go up, knowing that if they succeed, you don't get to go. Your job is done, you just go home.
And there was a technical difference, too, which is fascinating. Bourdillon and Evans were using closed-circuit oxygen systems. It was experimental tech lighter, but notoriously finicky. Hillary and Tenzing were using the heavier but more reliable open-circuit system.
So the experimental team goes up. How close did they get?
Incredibly close. They reached the south summit. They were within 300 vertical feet of the top. They could see the final ridge laid out before them. But their oxygen systems were malfunctioning, freezing up. They were utterly exhausted. Evans was stumbling. They had to make the decision to turn back. They literally looked at the summit ridge and had to walk away to save their own lives.
Which left the door wide open for Team 2, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay.
And let's talk about that partnership for a second. It wasn't necessarily a friendship born of long nights at the pub. It was a partnership of necessity and mutual respect. Hillary noted that Tenzing had substantially greater personal ambition than any Sherpa I had met.
They were both hungry for it.
Yeah.
They were both the best at what they did, and they knew it.
Exactly. They respected each other's competence above all else. So May 28th, they move up. They pitch a tiny tent at Camp IX at 27,900 feet. It's freezing. The wind is howling. The tent floor is on a 30-degree slope, so they're sliding around all night. And on the morning of May 29th, the day of the final ascent, Hillary wakes up to a complete disaster.
His boots are frozen solid.
Rock-hard blocks of ice. This is before modern plastic boots, remember? These were leather. If he puts them on frozen, the leather won't flex. It cuts off circulation.
He gets frostbite, loses his feet.
At best.
Yeah.
At worst, they both die. So, while time is ticking away and their precious oxygen is running low, he spends 2 full hours holding his boots over a priming stove, trying to thaw them out.
I love that detail. The history of the world hung in the balance while a guy from Auckland cooked his shoes.
It grounds the whole achievement, doesn't it? It's not just about glory, it's about the smell of burning leather. So they get the boots on, they strap on the 30-pound oxygen packs, and they start climbing. They pass the south summit, the point where the first team turned back, and then they hit the final major obstacle, a 40-foot rock face that is now famous as the Hillary Step.
This is the boss battle at the end of the video game.
It is. On one side, you have a sheer drop down the rock face, thousands of feet into Nepal. On the other side, a massive, unstable cornice of snow hanging over open air into Tibet.
No room for air.
None. Hillary found a crack between the rock and the snow. He jammed himself in there, back against the rock, feet clicking into the ice, and literally wriggled his way up backwards, using every ounce of strength he had left.
He drags himself up, then he belays Tenzing up, and then the ridge eases off.
Hillary top steps over bump after bump, wondering where the top was. He was hacking away with his ice axe, just completely tired, hypoxic. And then suddenly, there was nowhere left to go up.
11:30 a.m., May 29, 1953. Top of the world.
29,028 feet. They stood there. He said they shook hands in a sort of formal British way. And then Tenzing threw his arms around Hillary in this huge, joyful hug.
And how long were they up there?
Only about 15 minutes. And this brings us to the famous photo mystery.
Right. The photo everyone knows is of Tenzing Norgay. He's holding his ice axe, flags fluttering, the UN, Britain, Nepal, India. But there is no photo of Edmund Hillary on the summit.
None. Tenzing says in his autobiography that he offered to take a picture of Hillary, but Hillary declined.
Why? I mean, was he just shy? Was he worried Tenzing didn't know how to use the camera?
We can only speculate. Hillary later said, pretty pragmatically, "I didn't think it was a good time to start teaching Tenzing how to use a camera. But maybe it was just that, let's get the proof and get down." Or maybe it was a kind of humility. But the result is that the first man to stand on Everest is invisible in the documentation of that moment.
So they leave some offerings.
Mhm.
Tenzing leaves chocolates in the snow. Hillary leaves a cross given to him by John Hunt. They head down.
Yeah.
And then we get the quote, the line that is just so perfectly New Zealand.
They meet George Lowe on the descent at the South Col. Hillary lifts his oxygen mask, looks at his old friend, and says, "Well, George, we knocked the bastard off."
We knocked the bastard off. Not, we have conquered the peak, or glory to the queen and empire. Just,
Yeah.
we knocked the bastard off.
It's rough, it's understated, it's completely irreverent. It treats the mountain not as some sacred temple, but as a formidable opponent in a boxing match that they just won. It perfectly captures that Kiwi spirit of practical, no-nonsense achievement. You don't brag, you just get the job done.
So they get down.
Mm.
And the world goes absolutely crazy.
It was the perfect storm of timing. The news reached Britain on the very morning of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. The press immediately called it a coronation gift. It was viewed as this final, glorious jewel in the crown of the fading British Empire. People in London were literally dancing in the streets.
And the honors started raining down before they even got home.
Oh, immediately. Hillary and John Hunt were knighted. Tenzing received the George Medal. Interestingly, and this is a point of historical contention, Tenzing wasn't eligible for a knighthood because he was a Nepalese citizen, which is a distinction that reflects the politics of the time. But in the eyes of the world, they were equals.
So Ed Hillary goes up the mountain, a beekeeper from Tuakau, and he comes down a knight commander of the Order of the British Empire. Sir Edmund. That has to change a person.
It did. He was suddenly a global celebrity. He couldn't walk down the street. But what's so fascinating is that he didn't just retire to a comfortable life of giving speeches and signing autographs. He kept venturing. He became obsessed with the poles.
This is the 3 poles challenge part of the story. I feel like this gets forgotten. People think he did Everest and then just quit.
Far from it. In 1958, he led the New Zealand section of the Commonwealth Trans-Antarctic Expedition. Now, the main goal was for a British team led by Vivian Feats to cross Antarctica. Hillary was just supposed to be the support crew setting up supply depots for them.
But Hillary doesn't really do support crew, does he?
No, he had these modified Ferguson tractors.
Wait, let's pause on the tractors. These aren't like high-tech snowcats. These are farm tractors.
Basically, yes. Little red farm tractors with tracks put over the wheels and a canvas cab to keep the wind off. He was driving farm equipment across the coldest, most hostile continent on Earth, and once he had laid the final supply depot, he realized the tractors were performing really well. So, ignoring his original instructions to stop and wait,
He went rogue again, just like the Nupla Pass.
he just kept going. He saw the goal and went for it. He pushed forward, navigating treacherous crevasse fields, and reached the South Pole overland on January 4th, 1958. He was the first person to do so since Captain Scott in 1912. And unlike Scott, he made it back alive.
And he did it on a tractor. That is just incredible. And then later, he completes the set.
In 1985, he flew to the North Pole with Neil Armstrong. I mean, can you imagine that conversation? The first man on the moon and the first man on Everest just hanging out together on the ice. This made Hillary the first person in history to stand at both poles and on the summit of Everest.
But in between all that serious exploring, there was the Yeti hunt. We promised the listener we'd talk about the Yeti.
We did, and we must. In 1960, he organized the Silver Hut expedition. Now, it had a serious scientific purpose, studying how the human body adapts to high altitude over a long winter. But to get the funding, he partnered with World Book Encyclopedia, and they wanted a scoop. They wanted the abominable snowman.
Was he a believer? I mean, did Sir Edmund Hillary actually think there was a monster in the mountains?
He was open-minded. He had heard the stories from the Sherpas his whole climbing career, and he respected their knowledge of the land. But he approached it like a scientist. He didn't just wander around with a net. They gathered evidence. They found these so-called Yeti scalps in remote monasteries. They found mysterious footprints.
What did they find?
He brought the evidence back to the lab. The scalps turned out to be made from the hide of the blue bear, or the serow, which is a type of goat antelope, and the footprints. He actually demonstrated that if a small animal like a fox walks in the snow and then the sun melts the edges of the print, it expands and distorts into a shape that looks exactly like a giant human footprint.
So he debunked it.
He did. He concluded the Yeti was not a supernatural creature, but he did it with a lot of respect for the local legends. He didn't mock it, he just explained it.
He was just restless. He took a jet boat up the Ganges in 1977, the Ocean to Sky expedition.
Yeah.
The man just could not sit still.
No. But while his public life was full of these triumphs and these wild adventures, his personal life had a mix of profound joy and just devastating tragedy.
Let's talk about the personal side. We mentioned he was shy. How shy are we talking?
Well, he married Louise Mary Rose shortly after the Everest expedition, but despite being a knight of the realm, a global hero, he was too terrified to propose to her himself.
No way. The man who conquered the Hillary step couldn't pop the question.
He asked his future mother-in-law to propose on his behalf. He essentially said, Could you please ask Louise if she'd marry me?
That is actually very sweet in a completely terrified sort of way.
It worked. They had a wonderful marriage and 3 children, Peter, Sarah, and Belinda. They were a very tight-knit family. But in 1975, tragedy struck. Louise and their youngest daughter, Belinda, were flying into the mountains to visit Ed, who was building a hospital in Fiflu.
And the plane went down.
It crashed near Kathmandu shortly after takeoff. Louise and 16-year-old Belinda were killed instantly.
That is just unimaginable. To be waiting for your family at a small mountain airstrip, scanning the sky, and then just silence.
It was a turning point in his life. It marked a really somber shift. He blamed himself for a long time because they were coming to visit him, He threw himself even deeper into his work to cope. And when we say work here, we don't mean climbing. We mean the Himalayan Trust.
This is what he always said was his true legacy, right? More than Everest.
Absolutely. He founded the Himalayan Trust in 1960. He felt this deep, profound debt to the Sherpa people. He didn't just want to be the guy who used their labor to get famous. He wanted to give back.
He built schools, hospitals, bridges, airstrips.
The Lukla Airport, which is now the gateway to Everest, was largely his project. He was out there marching up and down the runway with the Sherpas to pack the dirt because they didn't have steamrollers. But it was the schools and the hospitals that mattered most to him. He spent decades fundraising and physically helping to build these structures.
So it's not just writing a check.
Not at all. He was there with a hammer. If you ask the people of the Khumbu region, Hillary isn't a hero because he climbed a hill. He's a hero. They call him Burra Sahib, the big man, because he brought education and healthcare to their children.
It's such a powerful shift from conquering nature to nurturing a community, from taking glory to giving service.
And it connects right back to that radiant living philosophy of service we talked about at the very start, doesn't it? The idea that a full life involves lifting others up.
So, as we move toward the end of his life, the honors just keep piling up. But there's one specific honor that tells you everything you need to know about his character. The New Zealand $5 note.
Yes. Since 1992, his face has been on the $5 bill. He was the only living person who wasn't a head of state to appear on a New Zealand banknote. But when the Reserve Bank asked him about the design, he had a very specific request.
I wanted to put Everest in the background, right? The scene of his great triumph.
Yes, and he said no. He insisted the backdrop be Iraqi Mount Cook.
His home mountain.
Exactly. The place where he cut his teeth as a young man, the place where he learned to climb. It shows that despite being a global icon, he remains so deeply rooted in his identity as a New Zealander. He didn't want to be defined solely by the foreign peak. He wanted to honor his roots.
Sir Edmund Hillary passed away in 2008 of heart failure. He was 88 years old.
He was given a state funeral, which is incredibly rare for a private citizen. Thousands of people lined the streets of Auckland, and his ashes were mostly scattered in Auckland's Hauraki Gulf. But there is a poignant footnote to that. A portion of his ashes was sent to a Nepalese monastery. There was actually a plan to have a Sherpa friend carry them to the summit of Everest for a final scattering.
To finally leave him on top for good.
Yes. But the plan was canceled. The lamas and the climbing community decided that the mountain was becoming too commercial, too crowded, and it just wasn't right to use the sacred summit as a scattering ground.
Probably for the best, really.
Yeah.
He respected the mountain too much to want to clutter it up.
I think so. But his name is everywhere. The Tenzing Hillary Airport. The Hillary Step, though, that feature has actually collapsed geologically since the 2015 earthquake. There are even mountains on Pluto named Hillary Montes.
From the honeycomb to the edge of the solar system, it's an unbelievable journey.
It really is an incredible arc.
So what does this all mean for us? We've unpacked the beekeeping, the frozen boots, the tragedy, and the triumph. What's the big takeaway here?
I think it comes back to the motto on his coat of arms. When he was knighted, he had to choose a motto for his family crest. He chose, "Nothing venture, nothing win."
Simple, to the point.
Simple, but profound. This was a man who failed his math exams, a man who failed his first attempt at Shoyu, a man who was too shy to speak to girls, let alone propose to one, a man who was physically unfit after the war, but he kept venturing. He kept putting one frozen boot in front of the other.
It reminds us that extraordinary people are usually just ordinary people who refuse to stop moving forward.
Precisely. He wasn't born a knight. He wasn't born a summit conqueror. He was just a boy on a train with a long commute who decided he wanted to see the world and then worked harder than anyone else to make that happen.
So here is the question for you, listening right now. What is the venture you are hesitating on? What is the mountain, whether it's a project, a conversation, or a literal hill that you're staring at thinking, I'm not the kind of person who does that?
Because if a shy, bee-stung apiarist from New Zealand can knock the bastard off, maybe you can too.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
Keep venturing.